Chirag Avasthi says, as the US dollar influence is declining globally, so in the future could the rupee become a global currency? How can India make this happen? A couple of 100 years ago, the rupee was one of the dominant currencies in the world. Even in the 19th century, even in the 20th century, the rupee was used as the currency in the crucial states in the Middle East, in the Gulf region. They had their own Gulf rupee, which was an extension of the Indian rupee. The rupee was one of the main drivers of the economy. But after 1944, we had the Bretton Woods. The Bretton Woods system was created, and the US dollar was adopted as the global reserve currency because the US essentially had won the Second World War and had the world at its feet. So that's what happened. And then the West started devaluing the Indian rupee. People will say Abhijit has no idea of what he's saying. It was the Indian government that was devaluing the Indian rupee. Well, please remember what happened in 1947. It was a transfer of power from one set of crooks to another set of crooks. So it was Western agents that came to power in India in 1947. And until very recently, it was the same people who were ruling India in their own way. So we know that their economic policies, etc., and other policies were terrible for India. And you saw the gradual devaluation of the Indian rupee over time. I think in the 1990s, $1 was 30 or so rupees, roughly, give or take here and there something. Okay, I don't remember exactly what it is. Google it if you want. Around the 1990s, $1 was around roughly 25, 30 rupees. Today it's around 80 rupees. There was a time when $1 was 1 rupee. So the West has exported its inflation to India by using the Indian rupee and so on. So eventually, what's going to happen is that the Indian rupee will indeed rise. What India has to do is to enter into bilateral and multilateral agreements with other nations to use the Indian rupee as a medium of exchange and medium of trade. And obviously, this will only work if India rises economically. Right now, India is a 3.5 roughly $1 trillion economy. We have to first reach the $5 trillion mark and then the $10 trillion mark to really matter in the world. But the world can see the trajectory that the Indian economy is upon. So we are in good shape. So what India needs to do is to keep growing its economy. That's what India has to do. Focus on the economy, keep growing the economy, ensure there is no major military conflict with other nations for the next 20 years, at least 10 years, hopefully 20 years. By that time, we will be in a really good position. Yeah. So why now? The first question is, why is the US dollar influence declining globally? Because now the world in the past 10, 20 years has kind of seen through what the US has done to the world. They always take this position of moral superiority. They talk about human rights, democracy. Day before yesterday, one of the I forget the name of the person on Twitter who works for Rand Corporation, which destroyed the life and career of John Forbes Nash, the great mathematician and economist. So that corporation, Rand Corporation, which is the US think tank, which is affiliated with the defense establishment, one of their minions was lecturing Vietnam on human rights. It's like Germany lecturing the Jews about human rights, that sort of thing. The Americans, we all know what they did in Vietnam. Untold horrific atrocities. They destroyed an entire nation. They bombed millions of tons of bombs on the civilians of Vietnam. Not just Vietnam, Cambodia also, Laos also. Agent Orange, that horrific chemical that still causes genetic defects in people. That's what they sprayed liberally over the forests of Vietnam. Vietnam is still full of anti-personnel and other mines. People still die every year because of that. Who did that? And all the massacres the Americans perpetrated, the My Lai massacre and whatnot. And they are lecturing Vietnam on human rights today. It's like a global cosmic joke, you know. It's the epitome, the pinnacle, the zenith of shamelessness. So the world has seen through what the Americans truly are. They are nothing but a hard, hegemonic, destructive power that seeks to rule the world, and they don't want democracy or human rights anywhere. They're very happy to prop up dictatorships all across Africa. They propped up the Saudi kingdom, which is not a democracy, which doesn't believe in human rights. They propped up this one family, the House of Saud, for decades. And now that Mohammed bin Salman is trying to actually liberalize the country to a certain extent, they are very much against him. So the world has seen through this. And of course, other powers are now emerging. That's the real reason why the influence of the US dollar is declining. The Russians and the Chinese and possibly certain other nations could come together and create their own currency and all that. So these are the things that are happening right now. The 2020s are going to be a decade of great churn and realignment. And by the time 2030 comes around, it's going to be a very different world in so many different ways. So that's the reason why the US dollar is declining. I mean, nations are trying to making moves to move away from the US dollar. We're not going to see that happen anytime very soon. But by 2030, you could see a very different world, economically and in terms of global reserve currencies.